Hello and welcome to episode 43 of Do You Expect Us to Talk? I'm Becca, your host, and joining me as always are Chris and Dave and Charlie. How are you doing?
Hello, how are you?
Good evening, folks.
Good evening.
This week we are discussing Star Trek, the motion picture, starring, as if you didn't know, William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelly, Nichelle Nichols, James Doohan, George Takei, oh my, Walter Koenig, introduced Mrs. Kambata, and Stephen Collins for some reason.
Well,
they
would have had a character uncast if they hadn't.
Released in 1979.
Yeah, sure, they put it in for a reason.
Stephen Collins, for some reason, they had to have someone playing.
Becca, every time you announced George K, can you just add in the "oh my" at the end?
Oh my. I would have to get George on the show. I just think he's amazing.
Yeah, but you want everyone famous ever on this show,
I would quite
whether
like
it's
to
their film or not.
Has anyone ever seen that Comedy Central roast of William Shatner?
I have, and he's brilliant on it.
I got to see it.
Takei's the best thing on it.
Yeah, he is.
Oh. He's an absolute, just the. He's so funny.
He's grrr, indeed.
What is it? It's a rude word, but I can't say it on the podcast. Anyway, what do we reckon to this film? What's your memories of it? How did you come to it?
My memories. I remember it seen on TV, bits and parts. I mean, I'm like you, Becca. This is the first viewing I've had in terms of from start to finish. I've never sat down and watched it altogether. I've seen flashes of it on TV, so I know it's like the kind of like the slower paced Star Trek with the bold chick, and it was a bit more like an actual Star Trek episode, so to speak. And I actually really enjoyed it, and I think I'm kind of middling in my opinion. I can kind of like see both sides of the argument now. I think what's happened with motion picture, I think, is actually what essentially what Star Trek is. It's a good Star Trek episode that's been expanded into a feature length. It is a bit longer because it's stretching about over 2 hours, where it could have been shorter. I don't know why it's as long as it is, because I think they do over embellish like some of the sequences, but I think generally it looks great. I think the score's fantastic. And I think it is true Star Trek. However, I do kind of see why some people won't necessarily take to it, because it is very slow paced than like the other Star Trek films. But I think I can see why Charlie would like it, and people who would probably agree with Charlie, because it is very true to what Star Trek is, and it's basically a Star Trek episode with all the bells and whistles, as in like all special effects and scores. I think that's. I mean, I'll listen to what Charlie has to say anyway, so he might tell me I'm wrong. But generally, by my first viewing of it and what I understand Star Trek to be, this seems like a very like true to the format of Star Trek for the first entry in the cinematic universe.
I think it's a really. I think it's a massive contradiction to this film. That I'm sat looking at something that is at once the most cinematic of this cruise films, and probably the most cinematic we'll get until maybe First Contact in terms of look and so on. But we spend so long, and we'll go through the film scene by scene in a bit, but we spend a lot of time putting the team together, the band back together, which has the feeling of a television pilot, and we'll get onto all of that in a minute. But I had to look this up because I thought, we'll talk about Phase 2 in a moment before we go through the film, but I thought this was going to be a television episode, and I thought surely it has to have been the first, and it was the pilot. But I'm looking, so it's at once the most cinematic because it's the grandest in scale, but it's the most like a TV show. It's the most like the original Star Trek series in that it's got like a heavyweight theme and idea to it, and it doesn't really go for action particularly. But it's also kind of the least like it because a lot of the sort of levity of this crew's been stripped away in a way that we return to a bit more next week. But that's been over-exaggerated because there are scenes in this film that feel exactly like the TV show, and I'll point to them when I get to them. It's at once quite a dense story, but it's actually very thin as well. They don't leave space dock till they start leaving space dock at 35 minutes. Everything's quite a slow process in this film. It takes them about 4 minutes. It's at once kind of beautiful in that it's got some money thrown at it, but it's also very drab in its colour scheme. don't generally like the uniforms very much in this. They're not a deal breaker. They're not something that really offend me, but I prefer what's coming in subsequent weeks. Shatner's a better actor than he was during the TV series, in my opinion, but Kirk's a bit of a dick in this, and we'll get to it. So a very, very mixed bag, but I will say that having watched it less casually this time and really put some effort and concentration to it, I've had a better time with it than I've ever had before. And I've always got a skeleton ranking when I start a series, and this is no different. And I think the motion picture is going to go up my rankings a little bit, judged on what I saw today. Charlie?
It's not bad, I guess.
It's all right.
It is definitely a contradiction, and you can see there the parts that were from the Phase 2 pilot and all the kind of trappings of starting off a series, which eventually kind of works in its favour because it does set off a series in terms of the film franchise. But I feel that because of the story and the nature of the story, it tends to kind of elevate that material a bit. And because it is kind of, like you say, a lot of the more philosophical parts of Star Trek, together with something a bit more inspired from 2001 and those kind of films, rather than some of Star Trek. And because of that, that's why it has this kind of really unique feeling to it. And it's not something where there's a villain and they have to go and blow something up and save the day in that way.
That is a good thing.
And it's, exactly. Yeah. And obviously that became a formula for Star Trek films later on. So, because of that, it doesn't have the action that some people have come to expect from Star Trek films. But the way it kind of uses the different themes, and like you said, Captain Kirk being a dick, he is a dick in this film. There are reasons behind that. So the same way that Spock has a potential different agenda as well. And that's one of the things I like about the film, is it's not afraid to look at our heroes and our idols and to deconstruct them and look at them to say, are they perfect? Are they flawless? I don't
necessarily think it's a problem with Kirk, actually. I'm kind of in agreement that it's not necessarily to the film's detriment. It's not what you're expecting to see. I think it is kind of with Spock, but we'll get it. And again, it's more to do with the structure of the film. Yeah. Because really, if you took out the TV trappings and did a rewrite on this, I think it would almost be a dual storyline. Yeah. And I think it's kind of half Spock's story as well.
Oh yeah.
And he's omitted from it for quite a while. And I don't think if you were starting this from scratch rather than adapting a TV show, that perhaps it doesn't matter, because Spock wasn't even in the TV pilot.
Exactly,
But it's a bit of a mess. We will come on to the structure of it in a minute, but I can see now. I finally get this film, I think, would be my headline on it.
And just a quick bit on the colours of the film. It's very obviously realistic isn't certainly a term I'd use with something like Star Trek necessarily, but it started to kind of go that way, and at least, especially with this film, tried to make something a bit more in terms of verisimilitude, as Richard Donner said on his Superman film, about in that universe. And especially where the original Star Trek, in that era, the mid late 60s, colour television was coming in. Television obviously had been black and white before then. Colour was coming in, so you had all these big primary colours that were used in that show. All the divisions done by colour. Yeah, so because of Robert Wise and the kind of director he was, I think he wanted to put his own kind of realistic stamp on Star Trek as well, and that is maybe an idea for the kind of look of the film. And it's interesting. I like the ambition of the film.
I think the other thing that makes it seem like a bit of an outlier is not only does it look different from all the other films, partly uniforms, partly just style in general. We go a bit more sort of naval next week. But I think also the odd thing about this film, and it's sort of revealed through dialogue, that it's only 2.5 years after the end of the 5-year mission. So we've got to the end of the 5 years, which we were, if it was in linear time, 3 years through. So we're technically about 4 years on from the TV series. Yeah, a decade's gone by. Whereas in the next film is set 12 years after this one, and it never references it again. So that makes it a bit of an outlier. They allowed the cast to age after this, which is quite important when you look at the themes next week. Becca, what did you make of it?
I quite enjoyed it. Yeah, I'd not seen this before, so apologies to any, real fans of it. I'm the
Why do you owe
newcomer to the
anyone an
series.
apology for not having seen it?
Well, no, it's just because we might have some hardcore fans, and they'll go, "What? Rah, have you never?" It's just one of those things.
I'll be honest. Like, if someone's going to get angry over someone who's not seen a film before, then fuck them. Quite frankly, you're being irrationally angry about something that doesn't even concern you.
No.
Unless you're doing your top 7 films on Twitter, of course.
Really?
It didn't feature in there at all.
It can get a bit nasty, and I know that. I mean, I've already had people come back on things I said in the intro episode, but not nastily, thankfully. It was our listeners who are generally very nice. But you haven't seen it, so what? What did you think of it as a first-time viewer?
Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. I thought for a film that's called The Motion Picture, there's not actually a lot of motion in it. No, it was because I was doing a bit of reading, and obviously this is part of what would have been originally like a TV pilot, and it's a TV episode spun out to 2 hours, but with the
and yet totally not shot like one.
No, it's not. It doesn't look like one at all. But it's got the TV episode with a film budget.
Yeah.
The Decker-Ilia relationship I found very distracting. But anyway,
it did feel very like it was just put in just for the sake of.
Yeah, just literally just so they could get into, find out what Vija actually was. It's like, well, it doesn't. It's extraneous.
It's like, when you watch like a TV program, and you got your cast regulars, and then all suddenly they pop up
random
a couple of characters out of nowhere who seems
you're never going to see them again.
Yeah, like, oh well, they're going to be prominent. Either they're going to end up dying, or by the end of the series because they give them some sort of importance. So they did feel very much like that. Yeah,
that's what. Yeah, a bit kind of like shoehorned in randomly. Yeah. No, I quite like. I mean, the effects obviously get kind of, derided, but I think they're quite clever. Obviously for the time.
I don't think this is the film to deride effects-wise in this series at all.
Yeah, I'd question anyone who would deride the effects.
No, but I was a tricky friend of mine, and he's quite up on like visual effects. And he was terrible.
There are a few moments where I thought, "Oh, that looks dated now." I mean, I think generally I thought it looks great even now, but I think there are sort of a few moments where I thought, "Oh, that looks a bit dated." But even so, I never judge like a film with dated special effects when it's
But I also think it's a matter of preference as well, because the thing that looks dated to me is actually the warp effect. But that isn't so much that it's dated or crap, it's just that it is different, and I suppose of its time, so yes, it is a bit dated.
You can imagine, like, back then watching it, it'll probably look great, you know what I mean?
We've never seen it before. Bear in mind, we didn't have the next generation at this point. We've never seen a warp effect at all.
No, exactly.
So, as a first go, it's fine. And frankly, when we get to Star Trek V, like or hate the film, we'll see something with a skinny budget where they've got to do effects they can't afford. We're going to see shots reused as early as next week. This is the film to knock effects-wise, in my opinion.
And also, it's also the fact that this film went out unfinished.
Over budget.
Paramount gave it a ridiculous tight schedule for post-production especially. So the sound mix went out unfinished. Some of the effects went out unfinished, and that's one of the reasons that they did a director's edition, so-called, in 2001. So what, 22 years later?
Yeah.
So what's different in comparison to the new, like, the director's cut, so to speak?
I imagine it's longer, isn't it?
It is a little longer. It's got certainly when they're flying through Vija, they've added even more to that. But a lot of it is visual effects. A lot of it is, I mean, you can tell which one you're watching immediately because when the credits come up at the start, they're white on black. In the director's cut, they're yellow on Starfield. When you then go to Vulcan, he's kind of got a Starfield sky behind him. In the director's cut, they put like a yellower skying what we're more used to.
And these CG kind of statues and things as well.
Yeah, a lot of people say, "Oh, it makes it a much better film." I'm not really convinced, to be honest with you. I don't think it makes that much of a difference.
Because they cut some scenes down as well, and cut some dialogue and a couple of scenes out as well, which I kind of didn't really like, and added some kind of a few more shots of San Francisco with all the shuttles kind of going around and stuff. And like you said, I didn't like the cheesy titles either. I thought the white on black was a lot more effective than the kind of cheesy gold kind of.
You can almost tell it's a prestige, but it's a bit like if Woody Allen had directed a Star Trek film. The titles at the start, but it's that would
have been a completely different film altogether.
It's very well.
I mean, I will say that there was one visual effect that, I think is probably a result of it being not finished, that never works for me at all. That they did replace in the new version, which was when the four of them walk off the ship at the end, and it's a matte painting of the Enterprise dish, which is very it's completely out of perspective, and it's just doesn't work at all. But in the new one, it's very obviously CGI as well. So.
Having said that, I do actually quite like the effects. I'm not deriding the effects or anything in any way. I do actually. I'm quite impressed by the effects at the time. Really stunning. I quite enjoyed them, to be honest. The main things I've sort of had the issue with maybe like the pacing. There are some script things like Bones, I need you now, and it's just like But apart from that, no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to it.
That's bizarre because in the director's cut, you get an extra bit of dialogue from someone explaining that Bones refused to get on the transporter pad. Well, Uhura's pretty much just told Kirk that on the bridge. So it is a bit like the Greedo syndrome, that we've just seen a scene with Greedo in Star Wars, and then we get the same information from Jabba himself just to force in that scene.
So it's like repeating yourself kind of thing.
It's just repeating information you've just been given. To be honest with you, I've had people say to me that the effect and look of V'Ger in the theatrical, it wasn't very good and it's vastly improved. Just don't agree. I just don't agree at all. No. The whole point is you're not supposed to know what V'Ger is. You're not even supposed to know the term V'Ger till quite late in the film. The idea that it's just this blue cloud is actually suits the story.
It's meant to be a mystery, isn't it? It's like meant to be.
There's got a mystery surrounding it.
Charlie, should we talk a little bit about the sort of how we ended up with this film in 1979 and some of the challenges it faced?
Yeah, well, as I don't know how many people really know outside of Star Trek fans, that originally what they wanted to do was make a TV series. I think they kind of dallied between a film and a TV series a few times.
It started as a Roddenberry draft of a film where Kirk has a fist fight with Jesus.
Jesus. We've got.
And so they
which they will visit later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So they eventually started to make a series called Star Trek Phase 2, and as an offshoot and a sequel to the original series. So it was kind of in the middle of that. So it had kind of like the old costumes and things like that, and the Enterprise was in a kind of halfway phase between the one we see in this film and the one in the original series. Leonard Nimoy did not want to return, so he was replaced by a different actor who played a Vulcan. That actor himself is in the film, very briefly.
But he's not the Vulcan.
No. And you have Persis Kambata coming in as Ilea. So it was supposed to be a whole new thing, and they had several kind of looks at redesigning it all. And at one point, you had Ralph McQuarrie, who did all the just work for Star Wars, all the concept art, doing designs. When it
was first a film. That was when it was going to be Planet of the Titans, and, where the Enterprise almost kicked off society as we know it, in that they were there at the sort of birth of fire. And things like that. It's really, it would have been odd, certainly, but
I love those ideas, those kind of
Great
concepts.
idea, though.
Yeah, and interestingly, the kind of Ralph McQuarrie design for the Enterprise, which is very different, is actually what they're using for Discovery.
The basis of it, because it's got a triangular secondary hull.
But the pilot for Phase 1 was called In Thy Image, and was written by a guy called Alan Dean Foster, who a lot of kind of nerds will know as someone who's doing a lot of novelizations of films. Like he did like the Alien series and things like that, and a lot of other tie-in novelizations, and is kind of regarded as the king of that genre.
He also did a book called Splinter in the Mind's Eye, which
Yeah.
was a Star Wars book that effectively, if Star Wars had been a flop, it was talked about as it would have been the basis of a cheapo sort of second film, rather than what we got. So yeah, Alan Dean Foster, very, very active in this sort of genre.
Yeah, he actually wrote the original Star Wars novelization, but that was credited to George Lucas.
Yes.
Really?
Cheeky
fascinating.
bastard.
Yeah, that's very cheeky.
They must have realised when it wasn't written in shit.
But actually, when the motion picture was coming out, Alan Dean Foster actually got credit on the film with the original writer who wrote the film, Harold Livingston, and also Gene Roddenberry asked for a credit and didn't get it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've just been reading, I think I mentioned it last week, I've just been reading the 50-Year Mission book. It's a 2-part book, and only part 1 is out until the end of this month. And the first part is more or less the original crew right the way through, and including the films. And there's a lot of talk around the motion picture and how it was made and everything else, which we could go into, and certainly there's shades of grey in the argument, because I've always believed, as Charlie said, that Leonard Nimoy didn't want to return as Spock. Leonard Nimoy sort of argues with that, but they did have a falling out over royalties, and there was talk that Roddenberry only wrote him into two of the first 11 episodes, and it's all a lot of he said, she said. But certainly during this certainly during this period, everything that Roddenberry wrote, the sort of studio did not like. So he was heavily rewritten in every single case.
Was that because primarily because it's Roddenberry, he doesn't sort of like much drama, so to speak? It doesn't.
I believe it was Jeffrey Katzenberg, who now runs obviously DreamWorks. He had a script. He had 2 scripts in his hands. One was Roddenberry's, and he described Roddenberry's as television.
Okay. I mean, I think it is one of the criticisms for this film was it is just like a TV show, but just glorified as a film, really.
Yes, it's the most cinematic of this crew. That's what I'm saying about massive contradictions.
I mean,
it really is.
I mean, I agree with you. I think the problems of it is generally in the script. I mean, you can kind of tell it's like the script is very televisual. I mean, right down to the very end of the film, where it's like they resolve the conflict, and it's pretty much like ends like straight away. Right, well, let's get going then. Straight on, Go, it's like,
it
it's
even
literally
finishes with a little bit of repartee. Like I said, the joke's on you.
Yeah, just like the TV show does.
Yeah, I mean, it's the other ththing. I think the other thing we've got to nail quite quickly is the fact that this is painted as having a massive budget, $46 million, which, bear in mind, Moonraker the same year, hugely lavish at 28.
Look how that ended up.
2 years earlier, Star Wars was budgeted at 5 and came in at about 8. What you got to remember is it's a bit like Superman Returns a couple of decades later, that it's carrying all the costs of the sort of aborted versions that preceded it. So they built all the sets for the TV show. Far too low resolution for films. They had a nearly finished model of the Enterprise, not detailed enough for films. So that model ended up getting used in Star Trek 3, funnily enough. But they had to redo everything several times. And when you think how many writers contributed to this, and the development cost of TV series and everything else, plus the fact that the whole thing went over about a 4-year period, it's quite easy to see how costs got out of control here. Because this isn't, for what's on screen, this is not a $46 million film.
How well did it actually get received then? Like, was it have its fans, or was it kind of panned at the time? Did it do well at the box office?
Well, I'll let Charlie answer that in a minute. But in terms of the crew, i.e. the actors, I think it's fair to say they were disappointed. Nimoy, Shatner, and Walter Koenig have been the people who've spoken most about it. They were all disappointed with the end result. Financially, it did $139 million, which, compared to the average Star Trek take, is pretty good. But as I say, $46 million film, and Moonraker the same year took 210. So, and Superman the movie, the previous Christmas took 300. So it's not a wild success. Charlie, what do you know about sort of a critical reaction to the film?
Yeah, they didn't really like it much. Yeah, it's I think the usual things a lot of people say, that it's quite dull and flat and very much. It's a cold film, because it is a rather cold film initially, and it takes a while for everything to kind of come together. And that's really kind of. It's never really had a good reputation, and arguably it kind of, to have it and the Wrath of Khan started the whole myth of the odd-numbered curse.
Yeah, there is a theory, and what made me laugh is if you go and watch Spaced, you can hear Simon Pegg say it. That all the odd, and of course he's been in odd-numbered Star Trek films now. Because it does.
He's to blame, really.
It does
technically, you could say he's part of the reason why that's kind of now reversed. Now since JJ's rebooted it, it's gone. It's flipped.
He's written it.
If you look at the original crew, well, let's look at the original crew films. I think 2, 4, and 6 have a better reputation than 1, 3, and 5. So there's some validity to it, I suppose. But 2, 3, and 4, although they vary a bit in quality, they are all part of the same story, really. And when you look at the Next Generation films, well, they only did 4. The last 2 aren't brilliant, full stop. First Contact is wildly overrated. I think there's some validity to it, but to pretend all the even-numbered ones are great and all the odd-numbered ones is crap is a bit simplistic.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, it's a bit too much.
It's not always as smooth as that. I think the reason for that, for the motion picture, it's not necessarily like the one that's most palatable for widespread audience. So I mean, this strikes me more as like something that more like fans of Star Trek will more appreciate more, rather than like the general audiences who are not necessarily acquainted with Star Trek.
Well, that's it. You look at especially Star Trek 4 and First Contact, which are arguably the two most generally favourably
outside of. I think 2 is normally regarded as the best, but 4 and 8 tend to be favourites outside of the fan base,
because they're both time travel stories. They're both exactly the same thing, really, fish out of water stories where they have to go back to a future, to the past, which vaguely resembles the what it was at the time, or something approximating a tiny bit in the future. So things that we relate to as a culture, instead of all the normal Star Trek techno babble and all that kind of thing.
And of course, the viewer has, surrogates within the cast that are having to have it explained to them. You don't have to worry about the dense lore of Star Trek because most of it isn't there because they're not in their normal time. And those bits that are relevant, our main characters have to explain to the newbies. So, I certainly think 2, 4, and 6 as an average standard are better than 1, 3, and 5. If you just looked at it that way. But they are the beloved ones.
In terms of the original crew, that rule does kind of vaguely stand, really, doesn't it?
Vaguely. Yeah. That's exactly the point.
I think even Wrath of Khan, which I think we all agree is probably the best Star Trek film anyway. Yeah. I mean, there's other reasons why it is considered the best, but the primary reason why everyone kind of likes it, or why it's kind of popular, is just because everyone loves a good revenge story. It's very popular. Everyone understands. Where even for me, who saw Wrath of Khan way before Spacey, you understand the fact that this Khan guy, he's a bit of a badass and he's pissed. He's out to get Kirk. It's instantly more palatable.
Chris, this film's preaching to the converted. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I don't know. In retrospect, I don't know what they were thinking, because they've spent so long with putting the band back together. And we're supposed to have some nostalgia, almost, for this team being brought together at last. Well, if that's not aimed at people that originally watched Star Trek, I don't know what is. And I think you're limiting your audience with that sort of thing.
I guess, and I don't really know, because back then, I mean, I don't know what the vibe was for Star Trek, but I imagine it was more like they didn't really know any better, so figured, well, let's take Star Trek and make it a picture, and that's literally what they did.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know for certain, because I certainly wasn't old enough to remember. I was around when this film came out, but I don't remember. Obviously, I was very, very young. But I think some of it is what we get with Comic-Con these days. Snakes on a Plane turned 10 years old a couple of days ago, and within the bubble of the internet and places like Comic-Con, this was going to be an unprecedented smash, and then it came out and did all right. And I think, it didn't do that well because, frankly, all the noise was being made within the same community of people.
Well, it didn't have much to sell other than the fact that it got Samuel L. Jackson saying that line.
Well, it was just a gimmick.
Yeah.
But I'm not likening this to Snakes on a Plane.
Yeah.
Trust me, folks, this is better than Snakes on a Plane. But I think Star Trek had definitely grown, or there was a perception it had grown since it had been cancelled. Because it had been cancelled for not being popular enough. But since then, conventions had become a huge thing. And so all the cast and Roddenberry and people like that were going all around the country and world, I imagine, being feted wherever they went. And it probably gives the impression there's a bigger market for this stuff than there actually is. But one thing I will say is we might say, well, the thing takes off next week. This significantly outgrows The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, the thing is as well, is I think there's kind of a myth as well behind Star Trek as this huge, massive thing that's always been there. I mean, so at the end of Star Trek Season 2, it was cancelled. And basically, the fans of Star Trek got together and wrote into NBC and whoever and said, please bring Star Trek back. They did bring it back. It had a smaller budget, and it
was on at 10 p.m. on a Friday.
Exactly, and a lot of the episodes are considered some of the worst. Yes, exactly.
Spock's Brain's not the worst episode of that series. That tells you everything.
And then it was cancelled again. And then, like Dave said, you had these fan conventions, but also at the same time, from that, you've got other things. You've got Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes was a huge success for what it was. And you look, that had 5 sequels between, 1968 when the first one came out and Battle of the Planet of the Apes.
74, yeah.
Yeah. And you had obviously Star Wars as well. And Star Wars was the big thing where you kind of Paramount kind of finally took notice and thought, okay, we need something like that. Because everyone was kind of scrambling.
That's part of how it became a film. It's only part. The second part is not for the first or last time, and we'll talk about it later in the series. The series, Phase 2, was meant to start a new television network. Yeah. Paramount was going to launch a television network with it, and that all fell through. But it fell through around the same time that stuff like Close Encounters and Star Wars was doing massive money.
Exactly, and then you had Paramount do Star Trek, you had Disney do The Black Hole, you had Universal do Battlestar Galactica, and all these kind of things, and you have Moonraker as well. So everyone was wanting to do lots of space adventures, and certainly
sci-fi.
With the built-in audience that Paramount had, that had been building, like Dave said, from all the conventions and things like that. And certainly the way that Star Trek had from its reruns and syndication that made the Next Generation so much success as well. Then you had kind of something that we thought, okay, let's give this a shot. We think we'll have something here. It didn't make a massive amount of money, but it kind of made enough to start.
Made good money.
Yeah, exactly. It made good money at the time. I mean, it's kind of interesting how we nowadays look at we're so focused, especially with all the information that's there on the internet about what the budget is of a film, what the marketing budget is of a film, and how that all stands up compared to the final box office. And we're told that film can't actually be considered a success unless it makes its money back 3 or 4 times and things like this. And everything is so focused on all these people out there telling us about box office, as if it's all down to these tiny little fractions. Whereas back then it was just like, this made a shitload of money, so it was considered successful, instead of, okay, well, this made this amount of money, but it didn't make that amount of money, so it can still be classed as a failure, which is the very kind of cynical way that Hollywood and the internet kind of looks at things.
There is a difference between the way that the studio reacted to this and its performance and the way that the studio is now reacting to these films. And I think it's much more responsible. Because the first film came out... when I say the first film, I mean the first reboot. I'm talking about the modern era. The J.J. Abrams film came out, and it did well. It didn't do amazing. I mean, you put it next to Star Wars, not only are they not the same genre, but they're not remotely the same level of popularity and never have been.
No.
Star Wars is much, much bigger than Star Trek. It's much more accessible than Star Trek in a lot of ways. And this series is hand to mouth. It's going to be a harder series to rank than Bond because the films vary so much. I mean, they really do. They're all so different from each other, and yet, even though there are similarities.
Wasn't it true that Roddenberry really hated Star Wars as well? Because apparently, obviously, this is like a very sci-fi movie, but whereas Star Wars obviously very inherently fantasy.
Well, he thought there wasn't enough sci-fi in it. Well, that's a misreading of the situation because it's not intending to be sci-fi.
No,
but
it's more kind of space western
certainly
fantasy.
This film desperately wants to be 2001, so it can come off.
It really does. I got a real 2001 vibe from it.
Although, having said that, when they're going through we'll hold that for when we talk about the film sequence.
Yeah, we'll talk about it when we get there.
But certainly, now they having had a sort of failure, not a failure, but the first film did well, but it didn't do amazing, and I'm talking about the reboots. So they then come with Into Darkness and throw like 200 million at it, really hoping that they can get like a fast franchise in terms of size, that maybe the next one will do 6 or 7, and then eventually they can work to 1 billion. And of course, it does not quite as well as the first one. So Beyond comes out with a 185 million budget. And again, they're chasing these massive returns. And stubbornly, the series is refusing to do much more than 200 and something. And I think their reaction to underperformance now, in their minds, is to throw more money at it to see if they can get the end gross up. Whereas their reaction to this was to cut the cost. This made decent money, but we spent 46 million on it. So let's see if we can make one for like 10 or 15. And I think that's a much more responsible way to go about it. And I think the films are becoming these sort of effects jizz fests that they don't need to be.
Like tentpole cinema, just like literally propping the studio up pretty much.
That's the thing. I mean, these Star Trek films have never made that much money at all. I mean, I'm just looking.
I think that's interesting compared to like Star Wars and things like that. Historically, I mean, they've done okay, but they've never made bajillions and squillions or whatever at the box office, have they? I think that's quite interesting. I think to look at.
That's the thing. I mean, I'm looking at the adjusted ranking on Box Office Mojo right now of all these films. Number 1 is Star Trek: The J.J. Abrams reboot.
The first one, yeah.
With $299 million. The second one is Star Trek: The Motion Picture with 283 million. And then Star Trek: Voyage, Star Trek Into Darkness, Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. So looking at it again, Star Trek First Contact on this list only made, only 92 million, which isn't really massive, really.
Normally, when they're adjusted lists, this is probably the North American box office, isn't it?
Yeah, this is...
That's not worldwide, but even then, we're not looking at massive.
Well, no, I mean, worldwide.
Yeah.
I mean, could one of the problems be you're dealing with essentially a TV cast as well? I mean, excluding the new ones, but you are dealing with like
a TV crew, maybe.
Yeah.
Stars were. I mean, there was certainly a time, even in my lifetime, where films were opened by a name. You went to see the new Eddie Murphy film or whatever.
Yeah.
I think, but then Star Wars had no real big stars in it, so not really. I mean, I do wonder if Star Trek is just seen as a bit niche. I think even now with the jazzed up effects, do people really want to be going to see Star Trek? I don't know.
You could argue that Star Wars made them names. I mean, I think like Star Wars is one of those films which is just like comes out of the blue. It's like it's not. You can't always bank on something like Star Wars.
I think it was it was the exception back then. You know, you went to see the new Burt Reynolds or Clint Eastwood film.
If you want to guarantee a hit, you have to like cement some sort of star in there somewhere, as well as like everything else. Generally speaking, but I think, well, especially when it comes to like the next generation. I mean, okay, you got Patrick Stewart, but I think Patrick Stewart now didn't have the same cachet as Patrick Stewart back then, because he's primarily seen as a TV actor because he was in Star Trek. So
he wouldn't have the same sort of draw, I think, would he?
So essentially, what you're doing is you're just going like literally putting like the TV on screen, which is what it is, but that doesn't say have the same draw as say like having like Tom Cruise or whoever on telling your movie.
And also Star Trek. Star Trek has always carried that stigma, and even I mean that's because obviously you look at Star Trek, the Abrams reboot, which is very much more in the Star Wars mold, and which desperately tried to reinvent the brand, and given the money it made, I suppose it was significant, but you don't see it kind of transcending as Star Wars did. Or as something like say The Matrix did. Star Trek is still got that thing in the back of my mind where people see that and they think of people at conventions with pointy ears, and which is a horrible thing, and I hate that. And I hate that that there's still this kind of, especially since we're.
But you could say the same thing about Star Wars. I mean, like like Yoda ears, or like.
You couldn't though. Star Wars has always been the cooler brother.
Because Star Wars just.
It was kind of nerdy.
An absolute smash.
Yeah, it speaks more populist, but it still has that nerd kind of culture.
I mean,
there is some,
yeah. I mean, it has changed a little. There's no doubt that like nerd culture is culture now. It's the mainstream.
And the prequels
but the fact is, there are still subsets within it that are like laughed at. Hence, Dungeons and Dragons will never be cool.
I still think you've got a massive dichotomy between like geek culture and nerd culture, and obviously geeks being the thing that's cool and that's acceptable to be a geek, but to be a nerd, I think, is probably like a higher level of being into something, being interested. It's still kind of got a bit of a reputation in that respect, and I think that's why Star Trek suffers.
Well, things can always change, though. I mean, like, I imagine there was a day when like reading comic books was deemed as like really nerdy and like uncool and unpopular. Now it's like the most popular thing in the world now.
Yeah, I mean, there are stories.
Fast change.
There are stories we'll get to down the line on different series where films weren't getting made because comic books films were seen as so risky.
Yeah,
and like that's the funniest thing in the world now. And again, I've mentioned the Fast franchise a couple of times. That was very niche. I mean, I didn't want to go and see... A friend of mine, we've got this sort of rule that basically if one of us wants to go and see something, the other one has to. We can moan about it all we like, but we can go. And he wanted to go and see Fast 6, and I hadn't seen any of them. I'd seen a trailer for like the earlier ones, and it just looked so fucking meat-headed. And it just... hang on a minute, though. I went to see it, and I walked in, and I saw, I basically saw a sea of like crew cuts and tattoos. And I thought, oh, fuck, this is not my thing. And I sat down and loved it. Ended up seeing it a second time. Ended up getting the box set, which was a shock, which was 1 to 5, which was a shocker because I didn't like any of them till I got to 5.
Yeah. It does totally shift.
That series has completely reinvented itself, and it's grown its fan base, and it's now mainstream and a lot of fun. And you can look at it and say, it's dumb or it's whatever. But the fact is, it's fun and it's mainstream, where it was just kind of for like petrol heads when it first came out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like even if you aren't into cars, you can enjoy other aspects of it.
I do wonder as well whether the Netflix series will do something for it, because there's a cachet around Netflix at the moment like there was around HBO a few years ago.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely.
Coming to its own now, isn't it?
And Brian Fuller as well. He's
I must admit, I am concerned with the fact that they're just basically doing like Enterprise again, because it's like set just before Kirk.
Enterprise was 100 years before, over 100 years before Kirk. This is a decade.
Have you heard what they're actually doing with it, with the Klingons?
No.
We remember
Rude back at the moment.
in the because in the last episode we were talking about it was supposed to be set in an event before, which is like apparently this is right in the middle of the Klingon Wars, so that'll give it a different kind of.
I don't worry. What I don't think Brian Fuller would do, because I think he's far too intelligent to do, is do a series that's all about filling in the gaps. Like Enterprise was, that let's explain this thing and let's make a little visual precursor to that. This will tell its own story. And I don't think it's going to be hamstrung by, we've got to be here by this time. I think it will tell its own story. And I'm really not concerned about it.
If it keeps itself separate from everything else, I think it'll be fine. I mean, I generally think I've heard a few fans speak about they prefer the new series to kind of go just beyond like
Voyager or whatever.
Yeah.
I get that, but the fact is, I don't worry about its time period as affecting what they tell. When Enterprise came along, I did, because the show was so safe back then that I thought what actually ended up happening that we'd get loads of silly explanations for things we didn't need explanations to. You may get the odd nod here and there, because bear in mind, if this is 10 years before the Enterprise we know, the characters we knew from that Enterprise are largely out there on other ships as lieutenants and stuff like that. So they may come across them one way or another. But, I mean, if they cross the Enterprise at this point, it's being captained by Pike.
The thing is, as well, is that Star Wars put a very, very negative slant on the word prequel.
Yeah. I think that the problem with, I mean, not only were the films shit, but they literally came up to a predetermined finish line.
Yeah.
The whole film series was noodling around until we can get to the birth of Vader, and then it was all done, credits. And that's not what this series is going to be. It is not there to get us to Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. I don't think.
No.
I agree with that, but I'm just trying to think of actually when was the case of like a prequel actually being good before Star Wars. I'm just struggling to think of like a good case for prequels and themselves have actually been beneficial.
Because they aren't. Yeah, but they aren't largely done, are they?
No.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Which we weren't very kind to be fair, Charlie.
which I love.
Well, you were.
Well, go back and listen to that episode and learn. No, we weren't horrible to it, but we weren't that kind either.
I mean, technically, I don't know even why it's a prequel. It doesn't really matter that it's only technically a prequel. It's not really.
Yes, it is.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Again, it's not. It doesn't finish with him walking into his office ready to talk to somebody about the Ark.
Exactly.
That's what . And again, it's all the way the prequels ended up being for Star Wars. A prequel in that field, you would have had what you ended up with in Last Crusade. It would have been the first time he used the whip, or the first time he said a certain phrase, or something echoing with something you'll see later. I think this series is just going to run its own path. It will fill in some gaps because the Star Trek of that era was making it up as it went along a little bit. So we'll learn a little bit of formality around what the Federation might have been then. But it doesn't worry me that it's a prequel, because it isn't a prequel. It's a Star Trek series set in that timeline.
Yeah.
It's not a prequel to anything, because it's not leading us to Kirk. It would be a prequel if it was Kirk as a lieutenant on some other ship.
It was like the Adventures of Young Kirk.
Yeah.
Kirk Jr., yeah.
Anyway, we've gone off
Jr.
topic, folks. In terms of the motion picture, shall we discuss this film sequentially?
Yes.
Okay, so where do we start off? We basically start off with a big...
Start off with the overture.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that was the old thing.
I quite like this. This is really good, because obviously you got Robert Wise, who's like an old Hollywood kind of figure, obviously doing like Sound of Music, West Side Story, things like that. I just think that's amazing. You don't get a lot of films these days that start off with the massive musical overture like you would do in the sort of the Hollywood films of the 40s, 50s, 60s. Beautiful piece of music.
I played it 5 times before I let the film run.
Do you think it was more of a statement of intent to kind of let everyone know that, okay, yes, this is a TV series, this is a movie, this is going to be an experience?
This is an event film.
I think it was possibly more Robert Wise doing what Robert Wise does.
Okay.
Because he's a different... He's almost... It's a bit like if Hitchcock had been around and making films in the 80s or something. Robert Wise is a little bit outside his peak era here. And it feels like a film that I wouldn't have been surprised with what we got if this film had been directed by like David Lean.
Yeah, it feels more quite epic, doesn't it, in scale? Whereas the sort of films that Robert Wise is known for, it's quite a somber film.
I think it is certainly a kind of statement about the film as an event. And I love it. And yeah, this is one of the last films to have an overture theatrically. I think The Black Hole was the last one up until The Hateful Eight from last year.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Just off piece there, Black Hole is quite a favourite of mine because it's always Disney's first sci-fi movie. But it'll be quite amazing score. But anyway, yes. And
also mentioning The Hateful Eight, this film was shot 70mm as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is rare. So yeah, they threw some. They wanted this to be prestige. The music we hear here is largely sort of Decker and Ilea's music from later in the film. It's really nice.
It's Ilea's theme.
Do you think that's the core central of the theme of the film itself, with the relationship between those two? I think that's more telling, really, or.
Well, I just think it's a beautiful piece of music.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful way to start it before the kind of very kind of bombastic way the actual film starts and the actual credits are. I think it definitely that relationship I think is an integral part of the film. But yeah, I think just in the way of the actual piece of music is a brilliant way of kind of getting you into the way the film treats space as this kind of romantic and lyrical kind of thing, and then kind of you go from that and you go straight into the main titles, which then go straight onto the Klingon scene, and it's all very, very bombastic for quite a long sequence.
The main theme is one that I never enjoyed when it was used on The Next Generation. No. It was all a bit much. I used to fall forward through it. I still do. Because it's like, it's assaulting my senses. Oh, fuck off. I like it when it's used other ways in this, such as the scene with Kirk we'll talk about in a little while. I like the music to this scene, but you asked a question on Twitter about themes earlier. I've always preferred next week's, but I think when I think about it, it's because I prefer the main theme. And actually, the overall score, no. I think the overall score's better here.
Yeah, I must have read that question then, because I kind of thought, like, for example, in like the Bond movies, would you enjoy them better? So say like something like Skyfall or something that doesn't have as much as the Bond theme in it, would you enjoy it more? So if like this one,
Bond's a bad example because you'll always hear the theme. What he was saying is some films don't have recognisable themes like that.
No, it's like, for example, this one, if you didn't hear strains of the original Trek theme, would you appreciate it more or less?
You hardly hear it. You hear it in a couple of places.
Yeah, exactly.
You hear it when they leave space dock and they're about to go to war.
Yeah.
But I think
if you heard it more, would this perhaps raise the film's profile a little bit more if you heard it more?
Oh, no, because it's got what's now an iconic theme of itself.
No, exactly.
It doesn't need it.
It doesn't need it at all, no.
Yeah, the only thing that's really missing is the fanfare.
Yeah.
The original fanfare, which was kind of brought back in the next film. But
I was all right with that though, because you normally get it over the Paramount logo. We've just had the overture.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah, it's very different. But no, because there's a lot of different themes in this. Yeah, in this score,
it's a richer score than I realised, because I've always been a little bit turned off by that main theme when it's used at its most bombastic.
Yeah,
I've never really liked it. I like the
which I.
Is it because it reminds you of Generations itself, like The Next Generation?
No, I don't think it's even used in that. Oh, The Next Generation, I love. Yeah. So it wouldn't be that it reminds me of that. It's more that it's just too bombastic for me. I just think, but when it's used alongside Kirk going up to the Enterprise in a while, I think it's gorgeous. So it is purely the fact that, like, tone it down a bit.
I think the Next Generation arrangement as well, which wasn't done by Jerry Goldsmith, was done by someone else. Is different, and it's not. And it's a bit kind of tinny and kind of doesn't feel as kind of full and as embellished. Whereas when it kind of really gets going here, and it's a very short credit sequence. I mean, I always laughed at the fact that you get Shatner, Kelly, and Nimoy, and then all the other crew are on one credit.
Yeah,
all in a line.
And everybody else.
And then suddenly it's.
I do think that's a microcosm of how this crew kind of.
It is pretty much. So you've got Shatner, Nimoy, and everyone else.
I wonder if they were all sat in the...
Late in the film, I was trying to remember if I'd heard George Takei speak.
Yeah. I wonder if they were watching it in the film, and when the credits up, Takei just went, "Oh my!"
Oh my!
someone went, "Oh, that's what your voice sounds like."
Yeah.
He barely speaks in this. I mean,
he doesn't have very many lines.
Just after I thought it, he said something, and I was like, "Oh yeah, he does speak."
Yeah.
He says.
He says some weird lines to Ilea, but I can't remember if they're cut from the original edition and then restored.
What were they? You're not my type, or?
Yeah, because literally, because she comes on the bridge and says, "My oath of celibacy is on record," because everyone kind of stares at her as if.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. That's not included in the film.
Yeah.
No, there's some history between them, isn't there?
Exactly.
Well,
yeah.
Part of it, I know you're going to cover in your fun facts later, Becca, because it's a precursor of something else. But also, that they are supposed to be like irresistible. They're meant to be a very sexual race, and they're supposed to put like images in people's minds, not necessarily sexual images, but that's kind of how their foreplay works. And the only reaction shot you get that tells you that is Chekhov's, because this woman who, I mean, I'm not saying bald women are inherently unattractive, but it's not in the zeitgeist as, particularly then, it would have been a lot more daring. And the idea that someone would go, "Whoa, look at that stunner," I don't think that's what they were going for. They were telling us something that wasn't quite communicated in the film, that she has men under her thrall.
Are they all kind of bold? Are they all like, is that like the thing about their race, or is it more...
I assume so, yeah.
I assume so. We don't ever see them again.
Have you seen them previously in the series, or?
I mean, again, there'll be people out there who know Star Trek better than any of us, and might say, "Oh no, they're in the background in next scene," but I don't recall.
It's just a thought. The thought that they might like shave their heads to make them less appealing, to kind of repress their sexuality somewhat. If that's
that's why I've put on several stone and started losing my hair, because it was just getting too much.
It's like on the stick.
According to Memory Alpha, which is the Star Trek Wikipedia, they're all bald.
Okay.
That's like a species thing.
Oh, she's got eyebrows.
Yeah,
that's a bit. But.
So go back to the opening with those Klingon ships, and that's another kind of indication that this is something much more bigger than the original series. And you look at those Klingon ships in the beginning. Not only were there more than one, but also the detail.
There wasn't.
Well, no, it was all.
It's the same ship show with three different passes. But
but the detail on that ship
is brilliant.
Is incredible.
Yeah,
I did notice they look kind of slightly more, not quite the Klingons we get later on in the film series.
It looks like it reminded. I thought of Reeves and Mortimer when I watched this, because when they used to do the heart-to-heart thing, and they had to have Max from Heart to Heart, which will go right over the head of quite a few people listening. He just glued like biscuits to his face to look like him, and it actually just looks like they've stuck Cornish pasties on their head. I think they look like they've got cocktail-sized Cornish pasties on their head, because you've just got that sort of crimped bit down the middle,
like
and nothing else. There's no ridges, and their hair is slightly different than we get later as well. It's more tufty. And I did not recognise that as Mark Lenard. I know it is, but I did not recognise it.
No, he's under a mound of makeup, so.
But we have started that process of reinventing the Klingons. Obviously, it gets refined as we go through.
Worf.
Yeah, and even through the time as Worf, because Worf in the first series doesn't look like Worf in the last series.
No, he changes as well, doesn't he?
His makeup just gets refined over time.
It gets a bit better.
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know what the relationship here is between the Klingons and the Federation, because you see the Klingons later on talking to the Epsilon 9 base after they get attacked, But in the original script, there was a scene where the Enterprise did have some trouble with some Klingons, and actually there was the original script called for a source of separation sequence, which obviously didn't happen until the Next Generation with the Enterprise D. But you go from here, and then you look at the Wrath of Khan with the Kobayashi Maru, and then the Search for Spock, and suddenly the Klingons are enemies again. So I'm not sure exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think I do wonder if it's just showing off the new crafts.
Well, yeah.
Also, the Klingons have always been seen as quite a tough adversary for us, if you like, and of course they're just taken out of existence with no trouble at all.
Yeah.
So whilst in reality, wrong word to choose really, but whilst if this were real, there's no reason their ship should be any hardier than like a Federation one. There's something about 3 Klingon battle cruisers just being taken out of existence that easily.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, it's a state.
We've also got when you do see Epsilon 9, one of the guys there was the guy cast as Zon, the Vulcan that was going to be in the series.
Oh, interesting.
So the one that we see in a while that doesn't last very long is not the one that would have been in the show by name or actor.
Fun fact.
That's fun,
not as fun. Not as fun as the fun we're going to have later with the facts. I've had a sneak peek there. So much fun.
That's fun, folks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is, again, going back to how Star Trek was before this and the kind of time between the original series ending and when this came along. Just looking at this film. And like you said, I mean, I don't know how long it is before the Enterprise leaves. Half an hour, maybe, where they're kind of getting everyone together. Because I did a load of research beforehand about when the original Enterprise was launched and how long it has been since the 5-year mission. And like you said, it's been about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Since so when the 5-year...
And most of that time it's been sat in space dock being refitted completely.
Well, that's it. So it came home, it started getting refitted, Captain Kirk promoted to a desk job. Spock went off to Vulcan to purge all his emotions, and Dr. McCoy went off to retire
to a swingers party in Disney.
Yeah, with that medallion.
Oh, no.
He became Medallion Man, didn't he? From Saturday Night Fever or something. I laughed out loud at that scene. I'm sorry, but I did.
Rocking his long hair and being like.
Yeah, later
he to join the disco fever.
Kind of turns into Don Knotts.
He does a little bit.
At this point, he's been at a swingers party. I think.
Yes, he gave up being a doctor for a life of fun. Damn it, Jim, I'm a swinger, not a...
but instantly he has a shave though, so I'm back in the Enterprise, might as well shave.
Who can blame him, really?
Here's a thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what exactly did McCoy do in this film? Because like, Shatner makes a big point saying, like, McCoy, I need you! And it's like, okay, and then what's he do? Because it suddenly occurred to me where, like, at the end, they'll like kind of got together and they're like talking about how like they formed a new life form. It's like,
we'll get there.
Well, I've never delivered a new life form before.
And you
so
still
like,
haven't?
It's like, really? Well, I didn't realise you actually did anything, McCoy.
No, there's a scene where like Chekhov gets his hand burned or something, doesn't he? And it's Miss Chapel who does everything.
Well, the thing is that again, this is something that the Wrath Khan gets a lot of credit for, but this film kind of tried to do. But it did it in a very 70s approach, which I kind of prefer, which is bringing the three back together, Spock, Kirk, McCoy. McCoy is there throughout the film as an advisor, as Kirk's conscience, because of how Kirk is. Like you said, Kirk is a dick. Kirk's agenda on this...
But he has the devil and angel on each shoulder, doesn't he? So
yeah, but he doesn't have the angel because Spock has got his own agenda.
Yeah.
So
very distracted in this film.
Yeah, so there's a lot of times where McCoy will, like there's one point where he says, Jim, you're pushing it. And he says, you use this to get back your command. Yeah. And kind of all the way through the film. And Ian even calls out Spock as well. McCoy calls out Spock and says, how do we know about him? How do we know about any of us?
He's got the right to say it, though, Charlie, as well, because
Oh, yeah.
In a minute, we're going to get to a scene where Scotty more or less says the same thing to him, but he says it a bit jokier because he kind of knows his place. In fact, the one thing that doesn't ring true in that thing is he's like touches Kirk on the arm, and it's like, no, you're actually being over familiar for who you are. Don't forget, on a ship, the Doctor has the right take command from the captain. There are obviously caveats around that, but there are circumstances where the Doctor can say, no, you're not keeping command.
Yeah, so I think, again, because of the nature of how this film is versus maybe what people wanted it to be, which is the old Star Trek as it is, which we see in The Wrath of Khan, ostensibly, that is the old Star Trek crew as they were. But this is all about putting that old Star Trek crew back together and getting over any of the issues they may have had previously, as in Spock and what has been going on with him, and him again probably certainly not developed enough in the film as well as it should be, but kind of the fighting over, which is something that's been an integral part of his character, fighting between Vulcan and humanity. Whereas in The Wrath of Khan, they're all back together, they're all very happy, everyone's the jolly crew as they were. Here, and again, this film has a very kind of 70s feel. There's a lot of films in the 70s were so much kind of based on character conflict, and there was a very kind of downbeat feel to so many of them. And it seems realistic that kind of these people that are kind of coming back, that are kind of, again, Captain Kirk's gone to this desk job, and it's not him. And it's something that Spock says in the next one. He says, commanding a starship is your first best destiny. And it's true. A waste of material. Exactly. And that's something that Kirk certainly realises. And as people say, he uses this crisis to get...
It's another thing that makes this film look like almost left out of continuity, because we move on 12 years next time. Kirk's in a similar position next time. And also... we've got the added element of a meditation on age and usefulness next time that we don't really have this time. But we cut to San Francisco next, which is obviously Starfleet Command, and we see him meeting up with a Vulcan who's going to be his new science officer, and he's basically heading off back to the Enterprise and tells him to meet him there an hour later. And to cut a long story short, he transfers up to the sort of station, meets Scotty, and Scotty flies him over by shuttlecraft. And we get told during that he's taken command back, because he said Scotty's worried that they've got to launch because they're the closest ship and everything else. They've got to launch, and yet they've only just had a refit. None of the systems are tried, and neither's the captain, meaning Decker. But obviously Kirk replies with, well, I wouldn't call myself untried. Reveals he's taken the ship back. And then we get a sequence from shuttle bay to shuttle bay, i.e. when it unlatches to when it relatches, is nearly 6 minutes. It's a long, long sequence, but I think it's fantastic. I love it.
It doesn't actually feel that long. It feels kind of very natural and organic when you watch it until it actually abruptly ends and you feel like, fucking hell, yeah. I think what makes it kind of mesmerising is the use of the music, and you get that longingly stare at the Enterprise. You kind of, with Kirk, thinking, oh, wow, look at the ship. And
he doesn't overact it. I mean, I've joked about it at times. He isn't jizzing himself. He isn't looking at it with incredible wonder. He's just appreciating it. You know, he's missed this ship, and he's us as well, because if you're a Star Trek fan, you've never seen the Enterprise in that detail. I mean, it's a completely new model as it goes, which they just sell as a refit.
It's all been kitted out inside. It looks new, very shiny.
But obviously at this stage he's only seeing the outside. We're seeing the Enterprise in more detail than we've ever been able to see it before.
And it's beautiful the way they build it up, and with the music as well. I mean,
it's gorgeous.
It's Kirk's one true love, and it treats it like a love scene almost, and the music as well. The way it's so romantic, and just the way it's structured.
And the way, of course, Kirk farts and falls asleep right afterwards.
He does walk on the bridge with a bit awkward little walk. Like
I love this, though. The music's lovely, isn't it,
just coming on the bridge. I mean,
and the way it's kind of structured, the way that space dock is kind of a bit of design genius, because of the way you see you see it coming across, and you only see bits of the ship through the kind of slats, and the music's kind of very romantic. But as soon as you see even a tiny bit of the Enterprise, which you have this kind of copper space dock, and then behind it is this gleaming white spaceship, and it's kind of the music kind of goes to these really high strings, almost kind of angelic like. It sounds like it's almost kind of mimicking a choir, and then it kind of slowly moves round and round, and you see more and more of the ship. And then it turns forward, and it's really the anticipation is really there. And then you see it face forward without any obstruction, and the music just goes wild and just goes massive, and it's just such a beautifully realised moment. And it is a love letter, not just between Captain Kirk and the ship, but also the fans and this ship, because it's not like Star Wars or whatever, where you have a dozen different X-wings and Millennium Falcon and Y-wings and A-wings and all that kind of thing. There are all sorts of different spaceships in Star Trek, but the center of it is always the Enterprise. So, and this is kind of like a celebration of that, and that's how it feels to me. That it's okay. On the one level, it's Captain Kirk coming back to the Enterprise, and on the other level, this is the Enterprise. This is the ship that you fell in love with previously. Like you said, this is it now with much more detail, a new kind of design for the cinema, and this is your Star Trek. This is your moment.
We get onto the ship next, and to cut a long story short, he has to basically tell Decker he's nicked his job. But Decker's happy to see him though, because he feels honoured that an admiral's come to visit.
Yeah, getting the royal send-off.
What I love about it, as soon as he walks on a bridge, it's like everything just seems like a complete mess, and everyone just stops and like, oh, thank God you're here, Kirk! Oh my God! It's everyone's just so pleased to see him, and then all of a sudden everything just starts like beginning to function, and he goes to see Decker in the engineer room, and he tells him like,
the ship isn't ready. We see that again in Star Trek V. We see it again a bit in Generations.
There's a little bit which I'm not sure is in this version, where because there's been a fair few versions of it, and there was a kind of an extended version of the film that was released on VHS way before they did the re-CGI.
They cut all of the Joker's scenes out of this.
Yeah, Joe Leonard wasn't happy with that. Yeah.
When Kirk leaves, they stay on the bridge for a second, and there's an alien guy who just talks about Decker and how he's been with the refitting the ship since it began. And then
this cut.
And then Uhura says our chances of coming back may have just tripled, or coming back in one piece may have just tripled.
Yeah, I think that is slightly redundant. I mean, we know why Kirk is there. And not only that, what you've got there is effectively, comparatively, an old timer. I mean, Nichelle Nichols isn't that old at this point, but she's that previous generation of officer, and she's like, the real captain's back. And actually, in reality, that's not proven at the outset to be true. If Decker had not been on this ship, they could have all been killed fairly quickly. But in line with the film itself, we're taking an awful long time to get out of space dock. So they set off 35 minutes into the film, they start leaving space dock, and they take quite a languid time over. It takes about 3 minutes for them to get out properly.
Is that before they have that little malfunction with the teleporter?
Yeah, I was just
sorry, yes, I've skipped that. Sorry.
Yeah, so I really like that because that's a really nasty moment. And it's it's not something you'd really expect from a Star Trek film. And certainly kind of going on, people always kind of call out the ear slugs, particularly from Wrath of Khan, as being kind of like horrific kind of moments. But that was seeing all these people kind of malformed. And that line says...
What's left of them?
Yeah. What's left of them?
What came back didn't live long.
Yeah. What I really like about it is that it you're right, it is kind of like nasty, but it's not graphic.
No.
It works. It gives you enough. It tells you like you can just be told something and it's just effective enough, and you just hear something like a teleport just working. You hear the screams, and it's working with the idea because I think you correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie, but I assume that the teleport always works without fail in the series. So something like I don't think.
Well, it was kind of a device.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
either it works or it doesn't. It means like
It was actually cost to start with because you can't the cost of seeing a ship land and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are malfunctions. I mean, you've got where Kirk gets split into like an evil and a good half and all the rest of it. What there hasn't been much of is fatal issues with it.
Yeah, it's quite shocking, isn't it? You think, oh god.
It's really well done. The way
my transporter.
They use the transporter effect as kind of like an opaque kind of field.
This is my favourite transporter effect.
So you can see what's happening behind, but you can't really see it in any kind of detail, which has a really kind of makes you think that something really, really horrific is happening, but you don't really see it. And like the screams as well.
Yeah,
it's just terrifying. I was quite surprised. Because I didn't expect it. Because I just kind of thought, something is always going to work, and it adds an extra layer of peril. Obviously, the ship's not ready, and you think, oh god, what happens if somebody dies halfway through? And you think, oh.
Well, again, it just adds it adds something a more realistic thing to something you never thought about before.
Exactly.
That's what I really liked about it, and the gruesomeness.
It's also reminding you the ship is not ready.
Yeah,
but it's also a device that it leaves a space for Spock, and I mean there's other narrative reasons that they will have changed it to that. What really sells it to me, Shatner. I mean, he's got his hammy points even in this film, and he's got it certainly as we go forward. But he has matured as an actor. He does sell this to me. This really unsettles Kirk.
It's the after effect, and it's like how he's even cool, and he sort of rest assures one of the engineers officers like there's nothing you could have done.
Yeah, he tells that's actually Janice Rand.
Yeah, it's not your fault.
Yeah. That's Janice Rand. You see her in about the first 9 episodes of the original series as a yeoman who was basically Kirk's secretary, is the best way to put it. And she left for various reasons. She only died a year or two ago, the actress Grace Lee Whitney. But yeah, she is a callback to the original series. That's Rand. He calls her Rand as well.
Again, that's it's a really kind of cold moment. He just says, "It's all right, Rand. It wasn't your fault," and then leaves. And she kind of looks at him as if it's kind of like throwing that in her face.
But it's also you could think about it in any amount of depth you want, because thinking about it now, he hasn't been at the sharp end for a while.
Exactly, yeah.
He doesn't actually know what to do. He hasn't had to deal with death. Whereas, plenty of people died in the 5-year mission, but now it's like, oh God.
Dick says to him, you haven't logged the star hour.
He couldn't even think like, right, well, I'm in command. There's stuff to getting on with. Let's not, let's just wallow on something. Let's just
doesn't know what to do about it. Other than he's got to let the families know. So he passes on his condolences literally about 2 seconds after it happens, and then gets himself out of there as soon as possible. But they leave space dock, and we've had those malfunction. We've got Scotty saying that they haven't been tested at warp yet. He told him that on the shuttle. So they go to warp. It creates a wormhole.
This is my least favourite bit of the whole film. I say the traditional Star Trek acting of the shaking about on the bridge.
It's funny when it's all finishes, because Persis Kambata is still shaking and no one else is. They all stop.
I noticed that. She was still quite vigorously moving around. The other ones are still
well choreographed in how much each of them is shaking.
Yeah.
No, lurch to the right, lurch to the left.
What it's there to tell us is 2 things, really. Although we only find out the first one in retrospect later, which is how much they need Spock, because you've got Decker doubling up as science officer. He's been reduced in grade and forced to do 2 jobs. He's executive officer, which is first officer, as we
2 jobs for less pay.
There probably isn't pay. We don't. The economics of the future are somewhat different, as gets covered and then contradicted all over the show.
Sure.
But you've got. But it tells them how much they need Spock, but it also tells you Kirk is not up to speed with how this ship works now. Because if they basically have Decker leap out of his chair when Kirk says to ready phasers, because phasers are channeling from the engines, which are already malfunctioning anyway, and it would have ended up killing them.
That's the thing, and then again you see Kirk take Decker and McCoy into his ready room or whatever he's in.
That's his quarters, which is odd. It's the weirdest looking quarters in the world.
Looks really comfortable.
It looks like a comfortable sort of It's like an airport lounge bar.
Yeah,
That's what I thought. Airport lounge.
and with the big windows from behind the ship as well.
It's quite a nice design. I mean, it's a little dated now, but it's quite nice.
Those chairs look so comfortable.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, it's like, can I have a word with? It's like if you're in your job. Can I have a word with you, please, Mr. Decker? And then calls him into his office, and then he's wrong.
And Bones goes with him. And again, I don't think that's just to cram DeForest Kelley into another scene.
No,
I think it's DeForest Kelley realising Kirk might even be a little bit out of his depth.
Yeah.
Because DeForest Kelley is. He Bones, they got out of this wormhole and he says, I've lost my wits. That was terrifying. So if I'm scared, presumably Kirk must be.
Yeah.
We do need Decker, although after that, I mean, certainly once Spock comes aboard, he doesn't even have a seat. It's a bit... They haven't thought that through too well.
I don't know if this is a good point to mention about the music. The music as it was, they originally recorded about 20 minutes of it, and then Robert Wise, again, called Joe Goldsmith into his office and said he didn't like it. And they said that the original music, which they recorded music for the Spock arrival scene, and then for when the Enterprise, Kirk sees the Enterprise for the first time, and then when the Enterprise leaves the space dock, and what they said it sounded a lot like sailing ships. And what happened was he hadn't really written a theme for it, so they had to go back and rewrite the cues they had done so far. And what he did then is he wrote the actual Star Trek theme, and then put it back in, re-recorded it all, and suddenly it was all working amazingly well. And it's kind of only in kind of recent years has it really been released, that music, to be able to listen to, and all the kind of different alternate cues and things like that on the soundtrack album. And it's kind of a really interesting contrast.
So where do we go from there? Spock joining, basically, I think.
Yeah, so we had the early scene of Spock, where he is on Vulcan, and he is about to graduate from Colonial University.
If you've just purged your emotions, you don't want to be seen celebrating too hard.
No,
it's like, I'm really happy. Oh, shit.
And the most
then he is part human, so
the most logical necklace in the world, which obviously came from Vulcan Etsy. Looking at it.
Yeah, it looks very nice.
Yeah.
The commentary that actually on Vulcan, a lot of the designs are hexagonal, and so is Vija.
Yeah, exactly.
But
that makes sense.
He comes aboard and he's clearly distracted, and this film gets knocked a lot for not having the sort of humour and interplay you got in the series. Well, we've just seen an example in Kirk's quarters. We'll see another one with the three of them in a little while. And there is actually humour because they go to the bridge and he's there looking incredibly distracted and not happy with it. And they say, "Oh, I'm really happy to see you." And even Bones is really happy to see him. And the camera reverses from him looking quizzical. And they're all like, they've all got these smiles frozen on their faces, particularly DeForest Kelley. And he's getting nothing back. And it's like, all right, then. I think that was really good. But then I think we go straight back to, do we go straight back to Kirk's quarters with the three of them? Is that right after that?
Yeah, because he tells him of what had happened and what he thought about the probe, and then says, "I can solve your warp drive problems."
Yeah, which he does within 3 hours.
Yeah.
But when they talk about it, I mean, firstly he's trying to get Spock to sit down, and I think he's uncomfortable by how distant Spock is. And his wig sort of moves a bit funnily when he says that as well. But
you can't get over the sideburns.
You've got like Bones making fun of them as well, kind of. And it's actually the thing this film doesn't get credited with having.
Yeah.
You know, it's not really like the series because the byplay's not there. Yes, it is. That could easily have been a scene from the series.
Yeah.
But yeah, he fixes the warp drive within 3 hours. I think the narration, because we get a captain's log then, and we get the sting of the original music, the theme tune from the TV show for the second time.
But a really kind of downbeat version.
But a really downbeat version, and then he fixes it, and we go to warp again. And at this point, I don't know, we're quite deep into the film, and finally they're on their way to this cloud.
And the slit scan
The bit we've missed, actually, is when Kirk takes command, he meets everybody in the recreation room. Which confuses me, because the rec room in the animated series, I forgot to say that last week, Chris. You asked about the holodeck, and I said, it does have it in the original series. Not the original series, I meant the original crew. It's in the animated series. They had a room called the rec room, and that was like a precursor of the hologram. But the recreation room here is where Kirk addresses them all and what's going to happen. They get a call from Epsilon 9 through, which Kirk gets patched straight through, and I think, well, that's his first tactical mistake, because the captain now cannot control the narrative. He can he should have, if that was the next gen era, Picard would have taken that in his ready room.
Yeah.
And then he would have told his senior crew most of the story, and that would have been cascaded out across the ship a bit more muted. But of course, they're all stood there, and they basically
in an email.
Yeah, they basically watch Epsilon 9 being just erased from existence.
That poor lone astronaut that's out there doing work on the space station.
Yeah.
But again, I like that it shows a bit of emotion from Kirk, because when it all happens, he goes, "You're off," and then everyone's kind of, "You're off."
You're off. Yeah.
Because everyone's kind of frozen in fear of seeing
course,
this.
He wouldn't have expected that, but it's just another sign he's a bit rusty. It isn't just he hasn't suddenly lost his judgment, and as we get later into the film, he displays that judgment again. But at this point, he hasn't had to make these calls for a while. And when people
it's a bit of an odd call to make, because I don't think anyone's ever dealt with a mysterious cloud on its way to Earth, destroying everything in its path.
No. But you've got an urgent call coming in from Epsilon 9, which is near where all this stuff happened with the Klingons. You've got your entire crew stood there. You might think you want to vet that message first. But the thing is, he's had 3 years sat behind a desk where every message he would take wouldn't have that overlay of peril.
Yeah.
He's used to just answering the quote-unquote the phone to whoever it was. And now all of a sudden he's back at the sharp end, and it's like, oh shit, stuff like that can happen.
Yeah.
And then you have a bit of exposition about Decker and Ilea.
This film struggles every time it tries to deal with this pair. It's quite good when he first comes aboard to see Decker's nose put out a joint.
Yeah.
And all the rest of it. And for him still to prove that he has a use. But that use, once Kirk knows that, there are people on the ship who've been involved in the refit, Spock's back, and it all becomes redundant apart from later on, basically. I don't really like the Decker Ilea stuff at all.
I think it's a bit random. I think it's distracting. I find it distracting.
I don't think their relationship really gets time to blossom, because before anything, but you get a bit of dialogue, that the fact that they've had a past, and then the plot moves on, and then she gets abducted, and then all that stuff kind of happens. It's kind of pre that, really. It's like when she has that kind of robotic copy.
Yeah, it's very underdeveloped.
So you don't have the emotional punch, so to speak, to make. I mean, it's the only thing that gives him relevance in the film, really, because
and it catches them out at the end. Because at the end, sorry to skip forward, but when he goes to sort of join with this, and he's like, "As much as you wanted the Enterprise, I want this." We don't really know why.
We didn't know what it is,
but we know that isn't Ilea. So it's a bit confusing, to be honest with you, and it's not.
Stakes aren't very high.
But it does have Ilea's consciousness inside it.
It does, to be fair.
There could be a sense that he wants to join Ilea wherever she's gone as well. I mean, it's not really explained. Is she just destroyed, or
at very least, but at very least, Chris, it could have been done a bit better.
Yeah.
I think that's
could
all.
Could have been done a bit clearer.
Yeah. I don't know. Is there a line where she says it's been replaced or something like that? With the carbon unit has been replaced or something like that?
Yeah, that unit's no longer functioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. That's the thing. I mean, I like the idea of it, and I think the way it plays out better as it goes on, it gets better, and it works for me from at the end. But yeah, it's very underdeveloped, and he's very bland as well, and it's all kind of very much kind of all these tiny little interjecting scenes that don't really kind of conjure up. I mean, you get the bare bones of it. And while she's got her oath of celibacy, and
bare bones, what an image!
Yeah, and he left her.
Medallion.
He left her planet and didn't say goodbye. But there's obviously the subtext there is that they're still very much in love.
That would have been developed later in the series, though, wouldn't it? That would have been
exactly.
There would have been a conversation at whatever, that ship's version of 10 Forward, assuming they had something like that, and they would have sat and talked it out, probably. Don't you realise I didn't know you still had those feelings, and you would have had those sorts of conversations.
Yeah.
The film from now on, it doesn't lose me, and it stuck. I stuck with it a lot better this time, because obviously they get to this cloud. The visuals are really great, and the music goes full on Bernard Herrmann's Vertigo.
Yeah, the music is gorgeous. I mean, so you get the first point where they encounter V'Ger, and they're sending out the same probes we saw earlier, but Spock is able to counteract that by transmitting his sign of friendship, and then that's where they're that's why I like it, because again, that's kind of, I guess, could be counted as action, because there's danger, and we've already seen what they did to the Klingon ships initially and Epsilon 9, but then from that it's kind of, okay, the danger's stopped, now there's the time when we can do some actual exploring.
Yeah, it doesn't actually sell us it plays with the idea that Spock may not be entirely loyal to the crew.
Yeah,
because he's got some feeling of consciousness from this ship. When he says transmit now to him, Spock's very slow to do so. Didn't really sell us that, but we get this very, very long visual. One of the things that's changed between the two versions of the film is the David Gautreaux character, the guy who would have been in the series on Epsilon 5. Epsilon 9, sorry. He said that they'd measured it at 82 AU or something like that. Do you remember that line, guys? Did you count them saying something about the size of it?
Yeah.
Well, I looked up what AU meant. Well, in fact, it's in the 50-year mission book. And it's basically, I think it's a bit more complicated than this, but it's the distance between us and the sun. Mm-hmm. So it's 93 million miles. So 82 times that. And that's been corrected in the director's cut to 2 AU. So this cloud across, this construction is twice the distance of us from the sun.
Bloody hell.
That's
vast.
So, but I'm wondering, what's happened to all the other planets it's going across? Is it just not is it just at the right time where it doesn't kind of hit
We
that?
don't know. I mean, don't forget that the Klingons, I suppose it's another reason you would choose the Klingons, because their first form of defense would be attack. Now, Kirk, at this point, shows he's hired for his experience, and we've seen him early in the film not be up to date with the craft. But at this point, Decker wants to do all these things, and Kirk's saying, no, we're not going to put shields up, we're not going to probe them. They will see that as a form of attack. And they just sit there until Spock seems to have a psychic link with them. It's saying, why have we not responded? That is the sort of thing I would have expected more to be written into the Ilea character, for reasons we'll get to in Becca's fun facts later. But he's got like a psychic link with it, and basically what we later find out to be V'Ger is just confused. It's like, well, we're talking to you, and you're not responding.
Yeah, I guess in terms of where it had been before, its mission is Earth. It's going towards Earth because it wants to find, as we found out, its creator. So it didn't necessarily need to kind of go past around any of those planets, I suppose, in any kind of significant way in terms of
it does portray its roots as being TV a little bit, in that we are told, not shown in a lot of cases, because there's a bit of dialogue that basically he mind melds with its Spock in a sequence I used to hate but quite like now, where he sort of does a bit of a spacewalk to it. And he basically finds out that he sees it's a machine planet, which he assumed was its home. But we later find out that it's an Earth probe that went through a wormhole to a deep part of the galaxy. Basically, with this machine, got it as going out there for knowledge, because it was a probe, and then returning back to where it came from to disseminate that knowledge, as we would do with any probe, or send back the information. And it's interpreted it completely literally, and it's basically tried to learn everything it can and then go back to Earth to hand it back. Now, there was a theory back along that this was some kind of precursor to the Borg.
Yeah.
Because when Ilea comes back because they probe the ship and Ilea gets basically disintegrated, or certainly assimilated, you would say, as per the Borg. And she comes back and says, "You will all be." She doesn't use the word assimilated, but that's basically what she's saying. And of course, Enterprise has fucking ruined that for us by having the Borg in an earlier episode and all that shit. So what was a nice little theory that I didn't believe, but thought was like a nice little what if, has been completely undermined. But I do love the look of this. I really do love the look of this whole thing is just to get to like a tiny little probe. They can walk around it like it's the inside of the TARDIS or something, with a little console. That's all it really is.
But again, it's something we don't really see in Star Trek anymore, and that's exploring. The whole seeking out new life and new civilizations. This is all of that in one film with this journey they go on, and it's something that doesn't necessarily seem to again not in any kind of anything close to this form. And also one of the things I love about these sequences, I mean, they're kind of the music it kind of goes from the bombast and romance that you hear previously, and goes into something that's much more kind of mysterious and almost ambient. And it's just as a side note, it's very interesting that two films that Jerry Goldsmith scored in the same year were this and Alien.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are certain feelings and certain sounds that certainly the two share in terms of kind of what they evoke. And
the score goes kind of romantic without going sappy, because we get a lot of Alea's theme again, which is relevant because it's all about her and Decker from then on. But it's in different keys. It's just really nice.
And there's also one thing as well, which to be fair to Abrams, he did in his film, but which was never really done as much as it was in here, was a sense of scale. I mean, I think one thing...
You do see it with, if you think about the reboot where the Kelvin is up against the Narada at the start of the film.
Yeah, and then you see the Enterprise.
Sheer scale of difference in size.
Yeah.
And at the end, as well, with the Enterprise.
Yeah. But,
we do get it in this. They use a little tiny 2-inch model or something at one point.
Yeah.
And but it looks great.
Exactly. And it's just this tiny speck travelling through.
And even then, they're underselling it because, again, they are travelling not that quickly through something that is actually from us to the sun twice.
Yeah, which is just crazy. But I mean, even when you see them, I mean, because the model, the actual the model for the film, the Enterprise was gigantic. It was basically
12 feet. I know that they had a 5-foot one for the TV show, and they had to sort of shit can it because it wasn't enough detail and it wasn't quite the same design anyway. But they did use it as the destroyed Enterprise in 3.
8 feet long.
8 feet.
Yeah,
that's still bigger. That's still bigger than like the Next Generation one and stuff like that.
Exactly. So again, because the level of detail, but also with something like that, where it's a physical object, just again, you get a sense of scale to it.
Yeah.
And where the model kind of, you don't have to worry about, again, I don't want to go into a big kind of models versus CGI thing, but in terms of things like this, there's a lot of things that you don't have to fake because you have a real thing there. You have a real physical object. And here...
Really, but I would go as far as to say I don't think the Enterprise has often been lit as well as in this film.
No. Again, the system they come up with self-lighting the ship, which is again made a very big part when they start up the ship and when they leave.
All the lights coming on,
All the lights come on, which is a great moment, and again reused in the next film.
They draw straws to change the bulbs.
That's what I thought.
And then just going through these huge areas and seeing all these strange things, and it's just kind of mesmerizing, really. And you think, looking at all these things and looking at it, how 1979 to 2016, and just looking how it still holds up, going through that sequence, going through the whole Vija ship, and it's just
But even the bits. I mean, the first time I noticed how crisp this film is. Now it's been restored and everything else, but wasn't actually those scenes. It was in Kirk's quarters where I looked at it and went, actually, the next few don't look this good, and I think it is because it's 70mm.
Yeah,
the detail is there to be drawn out. Whereas
generally on Blu-ray, it does look quite good though. Most of the scenes, I was quite impressed with how they turned out on the Blu-ray.
Yeah, I mean, given you've watched the theatrical cut, we've all watched the theatrical cut here,
sure.
And I wouldn't recommend that you have to go and watch the other one. It's not different enough.
No.
But,
I must have.
but at the same
I've not seen the
time,
director's cut.
obviously they went to update some stuff. You've watched it as released in '79, and is it Star Wars good in effects? No, but it's really nice.
Mm.
And the Vija stuff actually looks great. I'm not sure I buy that it wouldn't know its own name, but all right.
I must say, there's a lot of obviously this film is quite philosophical, and I think it wants to be 2001 in lots of different respects. There's a lot of a sense of wonder and a sense of just amazement at the enormity of being in this film. I think there's a lot of time spent on
pushing the species on. That is very much a 2001 theme.
Birth and death and rebirth.
Yeah,
evolution. That's it, definitely.
And we do see the birth of a new species, not the birth of a new species, but the joining of two species.
Two species, yeah.
One of which is sort of almost.
I suppose also you got the theme of technology coming back to to bite you, really. Essentially, that you start something, you create something, and it comes back as a even more powerful than you even expect it to be.
But also, I mean, we've talked about this during the intro episode last week, that what we might perceive as hostile in this universe isn't. We talked about it when we talked about Devil in the Dark.
Yeah.
This is not a hostile being in any way, shape or form. It needs to be understood.
Yeah.
We get to it in a bit more of a throwaway fashion when we get to Star Trek 4. That the whole plot of that film is kicked into motion by the need to communicate effectively.
And it's all about perspective and angles.
And I'm really pleased they didn't finish on a load of action.
Yeah. Again,
I think it could have been tightened. I do think this is a 90-minute film that they wouldn't want to release at 90 minutes anyway, because it would lose its grandeur and self-importance.
Yeah.
I think this film needs to have a certain length to it.
They could at least shave 10 minutes off it. Just in terms of, I think, in terms of the some of the sequences, they just take a little bit too long.
Once they enter the cloud, that's taking forever.
Yeah, I mean, I get what they're doing.
Quite a long time.
It's just like wallowing.
It tells you the size because of how long it's taking.
Yeah,
I get it.
And it's just wallowing in the epicness of it. It's like you're getting lost. It's almost like you're just getting lost in the moment, which I get. It's probably the main reason why I kind of got with it. I was like, yeah, okay, let's just appreciate the spectacle. Let's just go get caught up and just take a moment. Let's appreciate some scenery and just go, all right, yeah.
But bear in mind, we've taken 38 minutes to properly exit space dock properly, and then for about the last 40 minutes of the film, we're covering what you could cover in a third of the time. I'm not saying you should, but I can see why people might think this is a bit ponderous.
I did think this should be 2 hours rather than 2 hours 12. You know what I mean? I think it's like, okay, it doesn't need to be over 2 hours.
I don't think that would lose you too much doing that.
No. Just tying it up just a little, just to make it, fly a bit longer, because it's already you haven't got much meat on it anyway.
When they go back to the craft after this, because obviously Ilea and Decker, or Ilea, the Ilea bot, and
Ilea probe.
And again, it's a bit Borg-like because it's almost like a single consciousness. They're talking through Ilea.
Yeah,
it's a single consciousness, and they join, and I quite like that effect, as dated as it is, where they join. And then they're back on the ship, and again, it's a bit like the end of an episode.
Yeah. And
It's
that
a
was
bit
one
of
of
cheeky banter, and I'm thinking, you've just lost one member of your crew to death. You've just had a new member of your crew die in a hideous accident. You know, and they're flying off like, good job, team.
But there was also that thing at the they were sort of like, oh, they've lost like casualties was like Alia and Decker, and then they were like, actually no, consider them lost. Missing in an action. It's like, what is that meant to mean? That they're kind of like, if you just change your mind, or is it kind of like a melancholic like, no,
he's not saying they are missing. He's saying the record should reflect that, because to say they're dead is not right, but to try and explain what happened wouldn't be of much comfort to their families, I think. And again, Shatner sells it. I mean, he skirts overacting a few times, but sort of stays the right side of it. Yeah,
I mean, again, I think this is something that people kind of attribute very much to Wrath of Khan, but at the end of the film, I mean, there is the kind of this what happened, and then there's the kind of jolliness of it at the end. But this is really Star Trek back. Yes. Spock says, "I'm not going to go back. I'm going to stay with the crew." McCoy's all joyful about him delivering his baby. Yeah. Kirk's now
There's women spread-eagled at a party somewhere for him, but he's pleased to be back on the Enterprise.
Exactly. Everyone's the three are in their place. Yeah. And Star Trek is back.
But again, that's us coming with our modern sort of franchise mentality. Everything I've read around this film is, I don't think they thought about this film that way. But then again, they would have if it was a TV series, which is where the script starts.
Yeah, I think this is probably just like what the original script said, and just couldn't think of a better ending, so I thought, let's leave it like that. You know, and they don't think they quite realised that the way it kind of just... It finished itself off as very televisual. It's very like, you know...
Yes, it did.
It could have needed like a little bit more, you know, maybe another scene or to reflect of what's happened or something, you know. It just felt like,
but I do like the joy of being on the ship, because you got to remember they joined the ship in peril. Even Scotty, who's probably the most consistently I love my fucking ship of the whole crew, is nervous because it isn't ready. Spock's distracted the whole time. Kirk's unsettled a lot of the time because he doesn't know what he's dealing with, doesn't know his ship. The rest of them are completely underused anyway. So the idea that, like, they're suddenly... We see a bit of the joy that they're there. We see it again in later films. I mean, Kirk just goes, you know, to give the head, and he's like, that away. Well, that's a bit like they carry on at the end of Star Trek 6, which you may or may not have seen yet, Becca. But you know, at the end of that, they go for basically a bit of a joyride at the end.
Or even Star Trek 4, where they get the new Enterprise at the end of Star Trek. Spoiler. At the end of Star Trek 4. But again, I mean, you get the huge kind of ending where Decker and Ilia join, and everything kind of the cloud kind of dissipates and where it goes wherever it needs to go, and then you get that lovely shot of the Enterprise emerging from it all.
That is a lovely shot,
yeah. And then from that you have the little denouement, and you have it's a tiny bit kind of downbeat where they talk about it all, and then kind of up and down, and then I guess it's kind of okay. Let's get this thing wrapped up. I kind of anything else would be to me kind of extraneous to that. And
not only that, we're already well over the 2-hour mark.
Yeah, and then you have that beautiful shot of the Enterprise as it goes to warp, and as it glides over the camera, and it's a shot that's reused in the Wrath of Khan in the
you see some review shots. You will notice them now when Becca, for example, because you haven't. Not only have you not seen the films, but you're watching them in fairly short order. I didn't realise for years, and then you re-watch it and you go, well, that's the bit where Kirk goes to the Enterprise. That's the shot from that.
I've seen that before.
You'll see it in later films as well. There's bits...
But in the world is not enough when they reuse shots from Someone Never Dies in the Bond series.
There are bits where you re-see... I mean, Generations, there's a Klingon ship in that, and you see a shot from an earlier film.
Yeah. Okay, I'll keep an eye out for it.
It's not uncommon, but I don't have a problem with it, because I feel that way about the new films. Star Trek isn't really about action first and foremost. Yes, it might be about a spectacle. I think this film has shown us that if you're exploring something wondrous, then show us it's wondrous. Yeah. But at the same time,
don't labour the point.
It's my favourite film in the series, and I think even Charlie considers it the best in the series. It's made next week on a TV budget. You don't. I just think cut your bloody cloth. Stop trying to make Star Wars in size, because it isn't.
Yeah, and that's what helped it, was reusing shots like that.
Yeah.
In a very kind of repurposed, innovative way, really helped keep the budget down on Wrath of Khan, so they could do what they did in other places.
Well, I think what helped it was with the budget, they had to come and focus on the story rather than like everything else. I think that's key to making the best possible film, is to focus on the story itself rather than try and focus on the special effects or who you can get, any sort of clever little twists or gimmicks. It is focused. Do we have a good story? And that will trump anything that you can throw out at a film, essentially, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
And then it's setting the template for Star Trek to a point where we can talk about next week about whether or not that was a good thing.
The Wrath of Khan did bring into vogue a sort of very personified antagonist.
Absolutely.
And this film doesn't, and because they're all in different uniforms and it's set 12 years earlier and never referenced again.
And very slow in pace as well.
And then the next three are loosely a trilogy as well. So, which I think a lot of people don't really realise. But if you look at Spock in those films, it's a trilogy.
Yeah.
And so this film becomes a bit of a red-headed stepchild. And a lot of people, I've heard people on podcasts saying you can skip it and go straight to the second one. Well, you can, actually, but no, don't. Persevere. It's worth it. Yes.
I mean, yes, there certainly is that trilogy structure there, and it helps that the same people were involved over that thing than where they were on this one. But I still think this is a kind of important step to establishing that mood again, or re-establishing the mood from the TV series, which continues in Wrath of Khan, and this is kind of showing the stakes and what happened to kind of route to get there again.
But next week we are looking at characters that are allowed to age, and that adds a dimension to them that isn't here.
Absolutely.
But I had a better time with this than I've ever had with it before, genuinely.
And I'm really glad I've watched it, because it's one of those films that you tend to, well, as a not someone who's necessarily a fan of Star Trek, it's not necessarily the film I would jump to watch. It would be the more palatable ones like Khan or Undiscovered Country.
I thought you'd struggle with this, because I mean, I certainly don't want to pigeonhole you as an action guy, because even though you would like action, that implies you can't handle anything that isn't. Isn't.
No, it is my preference, but yeah,
you have a big problem with overlong films. It's not strictly their length, although they do have to justify being over 2 hours for you. But this film does take a lot of time that you could argue it doesn't need.
I don't think I necessarily have. I mean, yes, I do. I think I more have a problem with today's idea of length, but I see there's a difference between a film being too long. When I criticise it, I think most of the time they're trying to overfill it with extra scenes, extra plot points that don't need to be there. It's like, we just cut all that out. Why not just make it 90 minutes? The thing is with this, when it's something like that has a story that's quite simplistic and just tries to expand it and trying to gain atmosphere, I feel a lot more better about that, because that I can see the purpose of why it's long. It's like it's building up building up atmosphere and tension, or just lavishing in its own glory. Like look at that. Yeah, we look at that. Something that we made the really shot.
This did have to be a one-off.
Let's just look at it.
This wouldn't have run much longer if they'd kept making versions of this.
Yeah,
it did have to change. It is too languid, and I think it doesn't draw in enough of the quote-unquote general public. It might have done as a one-off, because it's back after so many years, and we're at the height of the sci-fi craze. But I don't know if a 1984-85 version of this film would have done very well at all.
I agree. I think it is a bit long, as I said. I think it does need a bit trimming, but I wouldn't trim too much, And so I prefer a film to be too long in this way. I think in terms of usually when I criticise films for being too long, it's because they just try to cram too much in. They're like trying to fill out like unnecessary scenes, and they just think, oh, what you doing? Just cut your darlings kind of thing.
I think this is one of those films that, because it starts as a TV script, if you cut it down too much, it will just increase that. People will look at it and go, why is this not on telly?
Yeah. But in terms of when it comes to this, I think they were still trying to find their feet almost, because they just done a TV show. They never really adapted it for film, so I think they were still trying to play with that idea. I don't think this hasn't been done on this scale, at least not for sci-fi. From TV to film, I don't think there's been many examples. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know, but I think this is probably like the more high concept, and in terms of like the fan base, I wasn't quite sure what the fans wanted and what will make it a success.
Well, I don't know, holiday on the buses.
Mutiny on the buses.
Yeah. Steptoe and Son, the movie, come on.
Rising Down.
Yeah.
Sorry. Porridge.
Yeah. Loads of fucking big hitters.
But I definitely get the sense that they were finding their feet while doing this film. They were kind of like doing Star Trek, like Kirk would just be like, oh, we'll just boldly go and just like experiment. Let's just see what happens. Let's just take a chance on it.
It's a brave film in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Becca, what did you think?
Yeah, that's a interesting concept about sort of a lot of fans saying, oh, skip the first film and go straight for it. I'm sort of a bit of a completist. As I say, I'm sort of new. I'm aware of the Star Trek world, but I'm just kind of new to this particular film series, having seen the Generations and the new films. But no, I struggled with the pacing of it. I think some of the script there is a bit strange. But no, generally I sort of enjoyed it. I found the biggest problem I had with the relationship between Ilia and Decker. You don't need it. It's really random, really distracting. There's no point to it whatsoever.
It's setting up a future TV show, isn't it?
Well, it does, as I'll tell you in a moment. But apart from that, it's kind of...
Spoiler alert for fun facts.
Spoiler alert for fun facts, folks.
Hey, it gets fun. I know what the fact is, though. It gets even funnerer.
Even funner. They're creating new words on the show, folks. I don't know how I'm going to rank it just yet. I think, like you do, I'm going to struggle coming to rank these movies, I think. Just because from what I've read about them, they are... I wouldn't know how to compare this one to Generations or even to Beyond. I've got no clue. But no, overall, I enjoyed it. It was quite slow, just take its time. It looks beautiful. Some of the visual effects are the most stunning that I've seen of sort of late 70s, early 80s cinema. But no, I enjoyed it. I would watch it again. And I can't wait for next week.
I think one of the biggest disappointments about this film is there's no decent kind of look behind the scenes. There's kind of bits and pieces on various DVDs and that, but I've never seen one that kind of got close to really showing how much kind of chaos there was on this film, how unfinished it went out, and the kind of the drama with Paramount wanting it out at a certain date and needing to hit that date. There is a book which is just released last year, I think, called Return to Tomorrow, which basically is kind of like an oral history of that particular period that's taken from tons of interviews and quotes and stuff.
Does Shatner not mention it, like, because he's written like a few books on it as well, hasn't he, like his memoirs and things like that? I'm
sure he has to some degree, but just as kind of like an overall look, because Shatner's would be very focused on him as well.
Of course.
But as an overall look, I mean, I love the idea of the film. I love the ambition of the film. I love the way it sets up our characters as people that we can't necessarily trust, and it's only kind of when it comes together at the end that we kind of see them working together, and we see the whole Ilia Decker thing together and how that plays off as something that kind of shows about Star Trek and new life, where a new life form is essentially created from these two bonding together. And again, the whole kind of the need, which is not only a human need of being able to want to know about who you are and where you come from and who your creator is, but also a kind of a robotic need almost, and something that's kind of, it's almost kind of mechanical existentialism, which I love, and also the very human need of the kind of romance and wanting to be together as one. And that whole concept coming together, while not developed especially well in the first kind of first and second act of the film.
I was like, don't really get me wrong. I'm not, saying that's rubbish, but it's just because those two characters are so really underserved that kind of aspect doesn't really come across well. But I think it's, as I said, like this film, there's such a massive sense of wonder about this film, and that's the thing I love about 2001. It's so philosophical. Like, where do we come from? Where are we going? And just the fact that you've got these two characters who are just so weak, and there's so much potential in their relationship, but it's just not really served properly at all, and that's what spoils it for me, sadly. But I agree with everything you're saying, Charlie, for sure.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot of wonder in the film, and it is absolutely beautiful. And the music is just astonishing. You
have to get past the main theme, and I don't mean the main theme's bad. It's just not to my taste. But
it's a real earworm. Seriously,
there's a richness to this score, though.
In my head all the time, I just like can't get out of my face. Earworm.
If you watch it again and you listen to certainly the Spock scenes and the V'Ger scenes, and you hear their music kind of intertwining together, it's really clever what happens there. As you think about kind of Spock and his kind of obsession with V'Ger, and both having fairly kind of logical minds. That's really interesting. But and I just really, really love this film, especially as a Star Trek fan. And objectively, it's not flawless by any means, and it has issues. But it's beautiful, and it's my idea of what I love about Star Trek.
Yeah, I really get that when I watched it. I figured that this is pretty much what Star Trek fans would like, would want really from a film, because it's basically encompasses what is a Star Trek episode, what the type of themes that you would want in a Star Trek episode, but with all the grandness, lushness of a cinema, put in there as well. It's just, I think it is like almost like an ideal, the closest ideal to an actual Star Trek film.
I do feel a bit incomplete not knowing some facts about it, though, Chris.
Well, as long as they're fun. I mean, I'm ready for a bit of fun,
I am. In fact, I would go as far as to say, this isn't a wormhole. I'm just pleased to see you.
Come on, Cole. Chat back. 50.
Got a wormhole in my trousers. Okay, fun fact number 1. My good Trek buddy, who shall go nameless, I shall blame him for any of these that fall down.
Sorry, we've already audited them a bit.
I'm going to blame him anyway.
You got shitloads wrong, mate, but carry on.
Yeah, I'm not talking to him on track again.
Yeah.
I love him dearly, but no. So obviously we hear Vulcan and Klingon spoken at the beginning. Obviously those languages have gone on to be created by other people. But the words themselves are devised by James Doohan, Scotty himself. Fun fact number 2. Obviously I'm not too keen on Decker and earlier in this film, but obviously they went on to become Riker and Troy in The Next Generation.
They were used as the basis of. They didn't literally.
Yeah, no, literally did she become? But no, it was.
That's
V'Ger's. The relationship was the basis of that. So.
Yeah, which is why I said during the show that when Spock is communicating psychically with V'Ger, it suits the plot of this film. But in terms of character development and what the character became, it could have been Ilia, because Ilia is Troy effectively. In fact, she's Deltan, as in Delta. And Troy is Betazoid. So she's a reimagining of the same character.
I think it's quite interesting, but with more hair.
Well, I don't know. She's dressed all the time. I see. Oh, I see on her head. Yeah.
Not very appropriately for a Starfleet vessel, there is she?
No.
I haven't talked about the costumes in this film.
They're
very
camels
strange.
in space, do you?
Oh God.
Oh my God. Fun fact number 3, Uhura's earpiece is the only original prop from the original series to make it into this new 79 film.
Yeah, because Shatner was wearing a fresh wig for this one.
The sideburns were different lengths every single scene.
It's almost like they didn't shoot it all on the same day.
Fun fact number 4, the trailers for this film were narrated by Orson Welles, no less.
I'm surprised he didn't voice the Cloud.
Well, he did end up voicing the in the Transformers movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like his last film.
Yeah, but that's got gravitas.
Fun fact number 5. This film was nominated for Oscars in set design, well, production design, visual effects and score, but was beaten by Alien and the visual stakes, and A Little Romance, and all that jazz. So yeah, lost out on the Oscars, but hey ho, we've got a really good Star Trek film. So.
Sci-fi never really works in. Well, never really won much in Oscars, really, has it? It's never really fared well. Sci-fi.
No.
Chris, don't bring the mood down, because I was just thinking, that's fun, folks! Well, I think that was a thorough and deep review with plenty of sober analysis of Star Trek the Motion Picture. But it's over now, Becca, which means...
Do you expect us to talk or return to Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan? The return of Ricardo Montalban.
That is part of the official title. And William Shatner, and Leonard Nimoy, and that bird that's going to be in Cheers. It's quite a full poster.
I have a fun fact for Star Trek 2, so you can have that for next week.
Right. Does that mean Becca's only got to research 4, or does she do 5 and we give people a bonus?
I say bonus.
I give lots of people bonus.
I've got one now. Good night, folks!